Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, investors are still reacting to the messaging from Jay Powell. The Fed chair is keeping hopes alive for an interest rate cut this year, while acknowledging a burst of inflation has reduced policymakers' confidence that price pressures are easing, though Powell did signal that a rate hike is not in the cards.
I do think it's clear that that policy is restrictive, and we believe over time it will be sufficiently restrictive. That will be a question that the data will have to answer. I think it's unlikely that the next policy rate move will be a hike.
Jay Powell's message was clear to former New York Fed president and current Bloomberg opinion columnist Bill Dudley.
The whole game plan is basically unchanged. We're going to keep rates here until we're highly confident that we're going to get inflation down to 2%. No hint whatsoever of a rate hike. No hint that it's not going to work. So market reaction, I think, was pretty appropriate given what he said. He basically said, we've got it.
Former New York Fed President William Dudley says Jay Powell's comments reinforce the higher for longer narrative over the medium term.
Well, Nathan, the attention now turns to earnings with Apple reporting after the closing bell. And we get a preview from Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
Analysts expect another decline in revenue for the fifth time in as many quarters, mostly on a sharp slowdown in China because of its sluggish economy, a ban on using the iPhone at official government jobs, and a lot more competition in the smartphone market from Chinese rivals. Today's results will also be the first official look at sales of its $3,500 Vision Pro mixed reality headset, not expected to be a major source of revenue anytime soon. Consensus calls for revenue of $90.33 billion, so iPhone sales still making up about half that total, earnings of $1.50 a share. Tom Busby, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Tom, thank you. Now we want to get you up to date on the protests still playing out on college campuses across the country. Police moved in on this tent encampment at Fordham University yesterday and arrested 15 people for trespassing. In California, UCLA suspended Wednesday classes after police in riot gear moved in on a pro-Palestinian camp that put out pepper spray on counter-demonstrators who tried to break them up. This professor, Bharat Venkat, says it's like nothing he's ever seen.
I've been in many protests over the course of my life. I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen students being physically attacked by, a huge crowd.
And all this follows hundreds of arrests Tuesday night at Columbia University and City College of New York. The Associated Press has counted more than 1,600 arrests at 30 schools since the protests began at Columbia 2 weeks ago.
Well, Nathan, we turn now to legal news out of Arizona. The state Senate has voted to repeal a Civil War-era law that would make nearly all abortions a crime. We get more from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
After the Senate passage, it just needs the governor's signature, and Katie Hobbs has supported it all along and posted right after the vote, "We are going to get rid of this awful law once and for all." Democratic State Senator Eva Birch says it is time.
I don't want us honoring laws about women written during a time when women were forbidden from voting because their voices were considered inferior to men.
When the process is done, Arizona will revert to the prior law, which allows abortion up to 15 weeks of pregnancy. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thank you. Turning back to markets, it has been quite a volatile day in currencies. The yen in Japan slid as much as 1.1% against the dollar after having surged up to 3% late yesterday. Bloomberg News executive editor for Asia markets Paul Dobson says there are signs the Japanese government made a move.
The evidence suggests that it's a second intervention by the authorities this week, a second attempt to stop the yen from continuing with its weakening path. The problem that they face is almost immediately once that was over, the weakening began again. The trend is very much for a weaker yen, and so the impact or the influence that the authorities can have is going to be tested at the very least.
Bloomberg's Paul Dobson notes we'll only know for sure when the government confirms any FX action, but an analysis of Bank of Japan accounts by Bloomberg News does point to an intervention of about 3.5 trillion yen.
Well, in Europe, Nathan, shares of Shell are up more than 1%. And for a recap of the oil giant's latest profit report and a look at some other key earnings, we bring in Bloomberg's Ewan Potts in London. Ewan.
Good morning, Karen and Nathan. Shell is keeping up at the pace of share buybacks, $3.5 billion worth in the second quarter. This as the oil giant saw profits drop less than expected in the previous quarter. And there's another buyback in the banking sector. Shares in ING, the biggest lender in the Netherlands, jumping after profits beat and on a new €2.5 billion buyback. And earnings from Europe's most valuable company today, drug maker Novo Nordisk. It says sales of its weight loss treatment Wegovy more than doubled in the first quarter, but it's facing both supply constraints and pricing pressure. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Ewan, thank you. Checking some stocks on the move here in the U.S. We're watching shares of Qualcomm. They are up more than 4.5%. The world's biggest seller of smartphone processors gave an upbeat forecast for sales and profit in the current period. Analysts say that suggests demand for handsets is increasing after a 2-year slump.
On the flip side, shares of Fastly plunging more than 32%. The infrastructure software company lowered its full-year projections for revenue and profit.
And to coin a phrase, Karen, DoorDash is not delivering for investors this morning. That stock is down 13%. The largest food delivery service in the country offered a disappointing profit forecast for this quarter.
Shares of Carvana, Nathan, surging up 35%. The used car retailer, once on the brink of bankruptcy, posted a surprise profit in revenue that topped analyst estimates.
And one other note in the auto industry, Karen, we know Tesla's cutting headcount by more than 10% around the world. The latest victims of the cost cutting are summer interns. More from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
Tesla is rescinding offers just weeks before internships were set to start. One student said his start date was 3 weeks away, and he'd already spent thousands on housing. It's near the end of the school year with little time to find replacement gigs for the summer. The aspiring Tesla interns took to LinkedIn and appealed to other employers. In one instance, a current Tesla employee asked her own virtual LinkedIn network to step up and nab one of the interns. The post read, "Please make our loss your gain." In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Doug, thank you. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Mayor Eric Adams praised the NYPD after the arrests of about 300 people at Columbia University and City College of New York. It comes 2 weeks after the pro-Palestinian protests first started.
These external actors with a history of escalating situations and trying to create chaos. Not to peacefully protest, but create chaos.
Adams went on to say the NYPD's precision policing ensured that the operation was organized, calm, and that there were no injuries or violent clashes. Donald Trump faces additional sanctions in his hush money trial as he returns to court today for another contempt hearing, followed by testimony. Prosecutors are seeking $1,000 fines for each of 4 comments by Trump that they say violated a judge's gag order, barring him from attacking witnesses, jurors, and others close to the case. That is on top of a $9,000 fine the judge imposed on Tuesday related to 9 separate gag order violations. During a campaign stop yesterday on a court off day, Trump in Freeland, Michigan, focused on the judgments against him.
The judge, by the way, is the most conflicted person in the history. I don't think there's ever been a more conflicted judge. Crooked and conflicted.
Trump also campaigned in Wisconsin. Manhattan prosecutors are asking for a September retrial for Harvey Weinstein. More from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
It was the disgraced movie mogul's first court appearance since his 2020 rape conviction was overturned by an appeals court last week. Prosecutor Nicole Blumberg told the judge that one of Weinstein's accusers is prepared to testify again. She suggested locking in a date after Labor Day. The 72-year-old, who has cardiac issues and diabetes, has been in a hospital since his return to the city jail system Friday from an upstate prison. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
President Joe Biden will expand 2 national monuments in California today, protecting nearly 120,000 additional acres from development. It's part of a White House goal to designate more land and water for conservation than any previous administration. The bulk of the newly protected land will enlarge the San Gabriel Mountains National Monument. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. When the Knicks and Sixers played previously in this series in Philadelphia, Sixers star Joel Embiid lamented that there were so many Knicks fans in attendance. Figures to be more of the same tonight for Game 6. Doesn't tip off until 9 o'clock. Knicks still lead the series 3-2, but Philly comes off that comeback overtime. Game 5 win in New York. Tyrese Maxey hit 2 3-pointers in the last 30 seconds. The NBA says the first one should not have counted, that he should have been called for traveling. 2 blowouts last night. Celtics finished off the injury-riddled Heat, scored 41 points in the first quarter. The rout was on. Boston won 118-84, won the series 4-1. Dallas over the Clippers in LA, 123-93. Luka Doncic, despite a knee injury and feeling ill, scored 35, and the Mavs go home up 3-2. Edmonton Oilers moving on, beat the Kings 4-3, took the series in 5. Dallas topped Vegas 3-2. Stars were down 2-0. Now they're up 3-2. Mets hosted the Cubs. Yankees and Baltimore, a total of only 3 runs scored combined in the 2 games. Mets lost 1-0. Both teams had 5 hits. The Mets blanked by Shota Imanaga. The Cubs' 30-year-old lefty, import from Japan. He's now 5-0 with an ERA of 0.78. Yankees and Orioles, 1 swing provided all the runs.
Here's Cabrera, and the pitch is whacked down the right field line. If it's fair, it's gone, and it is gone. A home run just inside the foul pole down the right field line. Oswaldo Cabrera gets to Corbin Burns, a 2-run homer.
On WFAN, Yanks won 2-0. Luis Gil gave up just 2 hits, a 5-out save for Clay Holmes, his 10th. He's unscored upon in 15 outings. Mets and Yankees both with day games today. 4th straight win for the Red Sox, beat the Giants 6-2. Nationals back to 500, 1-0 win at Texas. The A's shut out the Pirates. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports, Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. Higher for longer. It is still the mantra from the Federal Reserve after the 6th straight pause in interest rates from the central bank. But Chair Jay Powell and company are keeping hope alive that they could deliver a rate cut this year, though that hope might not quite be conviction. For more on the decision and the market reaction, let's bring in Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta. Good morning, Kriti. Well, it seemed like the takeaway, for me at least, was that the Fed isn't quite there yet on inflation, but it feels like it's getting there. Was that the takeaway for you?
At least they attempted to tell that message. They also said that, look, that they're having that last mile argument where it's always going to be tougher to kind of root out the inflation as you get closer and closer to the target. And that's a statement that not only the Fed has made, but central banks around the world as well. What's really interesting is they're basically saying that the hikes are off the table, that there's a higher bar to hike. And the context is everything here, Nathan, because remember those comments from John Williams, the New York Fed president, who said if the data supports it, they would consider a hike. Now, that wasn't his base case, of course, but he's just kind of stated the obvious. And the markets really took that as, wait, hold on a second. Do we need to put a hike back on the table? Chair Powell really threw some cold water on that idea, saying, actually, no, we are still kind of in a easier mindset, at least. And that seems to perhaps be it. And he didn't just do it from his commentary, Nathan. He did it, I thought, in kind of an interesting way from his QT policy. And I say his, but I mean the Fed's, of course, where you are starting to see a little bit of a deceleration in those in that QT starting in June. And that in itself, even though it is still quantitative tightening, is relatively easier in terms of the policy itself.
Although it was interesting for Powell to note that the slowdown in the quantitative easing, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a change in their thinking about when it comes to interest rate policies, really trying to keep those two separate.
He is. And we should clarify for a global audience, when we're talking about this decrease in quantitative tightening, we're going from about $60 billion a month of just letting kind of maturities roll off the balance sheet to about $25 billion a month. So it is significant. But again, it's not like actively selling bonds on the market. It is still a continuation of their ongoing policy. But you're 100% right that they separated that from the interest rate story. What's important is that they really took hikes off the table. And I thought Alberto Gallo actually tweeted about this from over at Andromeda Capital and said it quite beautifully in terms of what to pay attention to. He says keeping front end rates high while tapering QT is like pulling the handbrake while pushing the accelerator pedal. So the commentary you've heard off the back of Chair Powell's presser has simply been, is this the Fed trying to guide the markets and saying, well, actually, you guys have gotten ahead of yourself. We have not deviated from what we've been saying for the past couple of months.
It was really interesting as well to see that sort of whipsaw reaction when the chairman took the idea of rate hikes off the table, only for the higher for longer message to sink in. I wonder if we're going to get more market whipsawing when the focus turns right back to big tech earnings after the bell when Apple reports.
I'm sure we will. I mean, I thought what was interesting about the stock market reaction, we'll put the bond market on the side for a second, is that the stock market was selling off way ahead of Chair Powell. It's almost like they anticipated what he was going to say. And it was interesting because it was initially a positive that a hike wasn't coming, but then a negative that a cut was getting perhaps pushed further and further out, at least in terms of pricing in the bond market. Big tech earnings could change all of that. Apple in particular, of course, a big piece of the focus. Now, it's important to keep in mind, Nathan, that Apple shares and the S&P 500, just given it is the biggest weight in the index, have tracked very, very closely. It's even driven the S&P 500 to those record highs. But lately, the stock has been diverging from what the index has done as a whole. A lot of that due to some of that China weakness. The question after the bell today will be, does that continue?
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.